Well, hello, it's the 5th of July. Welcome along to Renew Every Morning. I'm Paul Anderson-Walsh, and we are continuing in our series of these postcards of grace, little vignettes of characters from the Old and New Testament where we can really see something fresh about the grace of God. So I'm excited to bring this series to you. Today we're going to be thinking about a lady called Abigail, the peacemaker who stood in the gap. And her story is absolutely wonderful. Our key verse is 1 Samuel 25 and verse 28. And the verse simply says this: "Please forgive your servant's presumption. Please forgive him. The Lord your God will certainly make you a lasting dynasty for my Lord, because you fight the Lord's battles." Now, this is the intercession of Abigail. And Abigail is married to a man by the name of Nabal. And by the way, for every one... Let's do this. For everyone Jacob that's woken up and said, "My God, it's Leah," I suspect there are 1,000 Abigails who've woken up and said, "Oh my God, it's Nabal." So, but just for the record, Abigail wasn't supposed to be the one to save the day. But as is so often the case, she is the one that saves the day because she was married to a fool. Nabal, by name and by nature, meaning foolish. He's hot-headed, he's harsh, and more importantly, he's hostile to David's men. And David had shown him great favour, by the way. But David is a fugitive. And this is a story about these three characters. David, who is a fugitive from King Saul. Nabal, who is a wealthy owner, a landowner, who is loyal to Saul. And his wife, Abigail, who's loyal to him, even though he's a fool. And what happened was that David protected Nabal's shepherds in the wilderness. They came under attack, and David stood up and protected Nabal when Nabal was unable to protect himself. But David did it. And when David asked for some help in return, all he asked was for some food. Nabal went, "What?" And he barracked him. He mocked him. He called him a marauding hireling, he calls him in the scripture. And he refused even the most basic kindness. Well, David was enraged. He was insulted. He was upset. And he gathered his men. He said, "You know what? That's not going to stand." But what happened is Abigail rides out to meet him at night and says, look, she calculates all the provisions that he's going to need for his men. She brings provision, she brings wisdom, and she brings grace. Well, David was just completely charmed by this woman, and she interceded without her husband's knowledge and turned back the wrath that was coming to Nabal by her gracious words. Well, who's to say what that hot-headed man would have said if he would have known she was going out to see David, but she does. But what happens here is the story quietly unfolds, and you think that's the end of the scene. But Nabal dies, and then Abigail becomes David's wife. And do you know what? It just feels to me such an amazingly redemptive story, this, because she doesn't divorce him. This is such a contrast with what's her name? Bathsheba. My mind's gone blank. It's such from Solomon's mother. It's a Bathsheba. It's such a contrasting story. Now it doesn't happen here. Here something very elegant happens. Nabal passes away, and what happens is this is a story about the woman who stood in the gap. She doesn't stand in the gap out of duty. She stands in the gap out of discernment. She could see what her husband couldn't see. Nabal, he had great wealth, but he lacked the thing that matters most. He lacked wisdom. And ultimately, this thing comes to character. He didn't have the character for this. And the truth is that net worth is no substitute for soul worth. And the truth of the matter is that Abigail had soul worth. I think this is also a story, if I may, about unequal yoking. Abigail had to carry and cover a man who couldn't see what she saw. And I sometimes wonder about that. I wonder about the whether we rush into relationships and covenants and contracts and partnerships and so on, and whether we shouldn't actually take a bit of more of a pause. One thing I can tell you for sure is the reason why most relationships break up is for the reason you knew was there in the first place but chose to ignore it, because that happens to us so many times. But remember what the prophet said. The prophet Amos said, "Can two walk together lest they be agreed?" I don't know. I think there is something about the incredible mystery of being able to say, along with Rilke, she said, "I want to be with those who know the secret things, or else alone." And I think there's something quite magical about that. And so now she is married to David, and David, like her, sees the secret things. Because you see, you might see the secret things and be married, and therefore you are still alone. That's the truth of it. But once you're walking with someone who is walking and sees what you see, well, that's a whole other story altogether. Abigail knew the secret things. She understood the cost of pride and the quiet power of peace. And the truth is, she lived with the tension, but she chose truth. And I just wondered, as I was thinking about this, as I was thinking to myself, there's quite a nice contrast between this story and the story we saw yesterday between Onesimus and Philemon. Because the story ends in kind of transformation. Onesimus is the runaway slave, reframed as a brother. Philemon, the master, invited to become more than just powerful. He's invited to become gracious. And both stories, it seems to me, Abigail's and Philemon's, show us what grace does best. Grace makes room. It always does. There's something, I don't know, there's a spaciousness in grace, which I find very interesting. Sometimes it makes room for peace. Sometimes it makes room for new power. But it always, always, always makes room for love. And today's grace note is quite simple, really. Sometimes grace comes wrapped in courage. Sometimes. Abigail shows us that intercession is not interference. It's the courage to stand in the gap between wrath and mercy, between what was and what could be. And when tempests flare and when pride looms large, grace remembers, just whispers, remember who you are. So look, be encouraged today. I think hers is a very simple but very lovely story of grace under fire and learning to love on the job. All right, God bless. Bye-bye. See you tomorrow.